Greetings, greetings. Welcome to the open forum hosted by the several heads of state. Um, I'm Akil Bey, Meru State, Wazir Al-Rez, or Governor of Meru State Republic, along here with the two other heads of state from New Mecca and DIMPT, who will introduce themselves here in a second. But I just want to thank everybody for coming into the open forum tonight. Thanks all the listeners who will be listening to this. Um, this document we'll be going over is produced by the um, United Nations General Assembly 8th session, Easter on October 12th, 1953. So without further ado, I'd like to yield the floor to either the two other wazirs so they can introduce themselves, and we can go ahead and get started here.
Islam. I'm Amir Hassan El from the Elodium Moorish Palladium of New Mecca. I'm glad to be here. Thank you.
Islam. I'm Kendon Bay from DIMPT, the Lord Morocco, France, Texas. Um, Akil Wazir, if where do we stop off at? And if you want, I'll begin. And if someone could help me out, when I get a little tired, if that's okay.
Yeah. Um, we started off, well, we finished off at 23. But before we get started, we could just have a quick recap. Um, for those who may have not been in attendance in the last meeting, or any of these meetings that encompass these documents. So this document again is one of three documents that speaks on the relationship between France and Morocco in relation to the 8th session of the General Assembly of the United Nations. In our prior open forum, we discussed a few points on how basically France had began to colonize the Moorish subjects in a way um, that did not uphold the treaties, obviously, but in a way that influenced France to be a better state. It made France a better state by allowing them to follow our instructions, to reform governments in which they took on for themselves their own government. Unfortunately, it did not benefit the Moorish people. Everything that was basically supposed to happen to the Moorish people and the Moorish government happened to the French subjects, part of the French government. Um, so this document pretty much explains um, uh, the relationship, or so much of the relationship, between France and the Moorish subjects. So we'll continue off, and also where we exactly began to end off here. Um, it began to speak on um, how France basically began to infiltrate and cause confusion in Morocco in many different ways, whether that may be agents, whether that may be misinformation, etc. Right. So I'll yield to Wazir Kendon so that we can begin the reading.
Okay, Islam. 24, Wazir?
Yeah.
Okay. A further effort at breaking the unity of Morocco had been undertaken by encouraging and succeeding, fraternizing to undertake a schematic activities. Those activities had been organized into a movement under the apparent leadership um, under the apparent leadership of the notorious Kanata, friend of El Lua. Kanata and his movement had been declared non-Muslim by the highest religious authority in all of the world, including that of El Kawin in Fez and Al Azhar in Cairo. He had also been condemned as a uh, mortad, which in Muslim law was punishable with death. Such was the nature of those who had been portrayed as the pillars of belief. The famous French author Barnardet had written in the July issue of the Temps Moderns that those fraternized had been supported and succeeded by the French administration in Morocco because they constituted an element of division in the country. Professor Louis Maxson, a consultant of North African affairs, was of the same opinion. The importance of those fraternized was not a religious one. Their importance will become clear when one realized that they were little more than an element in the new pattern of government. Finally, little, if any, effort was being made to educate the Moroccan people, whereas much was being done for the French residents at the expense of the Moroccan taxpayer. Moreover, the educational process regarding Moroccans tended strongly towards assimilation by France, but Moroccan people had reacted in a constructive manner to the danger of such an educational policy. They had opened private schools financed by voluntary contribution. Until lately, all those schools had been closed by the authorities so that peace might reign in Morocco, undisturbed by enlightenment. That national culture, which was so heavily attacked, was the Arab culture, which had thrown its light on the darkness of the Middle Ages, helped create the European Renaissance.
Real quick point of interest. Um, I just wanted to speak in reference to the last part. Uh, and in the documents that follow up with this, as we see right here, it says Berbers and then it says Arab elsewhere, right? Um, this is something to pay attention to. Nonetheless, when we talk about Berber, Arab, even though we're just talking about Moroccans at the end of the day, um, but there's still a differentiation being made for a reason. All right, so just pay attention as we read this document as well as the other documents when they say Berber, Arab, um, how the Arabs went and taught Moors in Europe, all this type of stuff. Who they giving credit to, right? What's the transition of the mentalities during the signs of the times? Because in today's times, Moors, they give credit to the Berbers and the Arabs. They take full credit for both, not knowing or not understanding Arabs, etc. So I just want to throw that out there.
Islam, and I want to throw this. I'm not for sure it's this particular document, but I see it speak a little bit about religion. But as you start to pay attention, now you're gonna understand the different aspect of Islam, not just from a religious nature, or how we came into knowing Islam, or what we think of Islam is from a Moorish American perspective. you're gonna start seeing that the Berbers, right, or the original Moors, Islam meant something else to them than it did to the Arab. But I'll continue. 26. Turning to the present pattern of government in Morocco, Mr. Zindini recalled the information presented to the committee during the seventh session about the French residents, the caddies, and passes, the revolt against the Sultan, and religious um,
Fraternities.
fraternities. Thank you. He proposed to bring those elements together and present the situation as a whole. 27. After 27 years of occupation, the French residents numbered only 125,000. Since World War II, however, they had increased to 425,000, about 4% of the inhabitants of Morocco. The policy of French settlement had been officially instituted and was aided by various state measures. The colonists were favored by the tax policy, paying only 50% of the land tax, while Moroccan paid it in full. Thus, the settlers contributed only about 5% of the budget. On the other hand, over 50% of the expenditures from the Moroccan budget was on half of the French residents. They were assured of legal, administrative, and financial faculties for the exportation of land, beginning first with public lands and those belonging to Muslims, foundations, and educational institutions, or those which had no clear title. They had eventually begun exporting private property. The results was that about 20% of the good land was owned by about 6,000 Frenchmen. Any concessions for subsoil exportation went mainly to the French, and many high officials had an interest in those riches. The settlers enjoyed family allowances, social security, and trade union rights, which were denied to Morocco, who had to accept low wages and even the equivalent of forced labor. I'm gonna pause right there. Like, doesn't that sound so familiar? Like everything that they're saying that took place.
Yeah. Sounds like the same thing that's happened here.
Islam. But I'm gonna keep going. But as you keep looking more, like we're here, like and they're gonna admit that in education and health expenditures, the French residents also received advantages. 82% of the funds for housing were used for the benefit of the French residents, who constituted only 4% of the populace. And it should be remembered that the Moroccans provided 95% of the tax money. 28. Some individual Moroccans who were friendly to the authorities received some leftover advantages.
Point of interest. So they're in Morocco, right? And we got these foreigners coming into Morocco and taking majority of land, a good land, and at the same time paying less taxes for it than the inhabitants, the original people. So what they're doing is they're colonizing the Moroccans and making them second-class citizens in their own home.
Right. Uh,
Like Martin Luther King said, is languished in the corners of American society where he finds himself exiled on his own homeland. Martin Luther King said that to us. That's not
right. Right.
Okay, 28. Some individual Moroccans were friendly to the authorities, received some leftover advantages. The French created logical uh, chaffatins and, and administrators and the heads of a religious fraternity, whom Mr. Zindini described as the newly created described as the newly created feudals received some share. The most notorious of those was El Gladu, the so-called leader of the Berbers. He was in fact only a government official who had become fabulously rich in office. His activities was notorious throughout North Africa and had been condemned as non-Muslim by the highest authorities of the Muslim world.
Point of interest. So right quick before we continue, um, it this is where it begins to speak more about the intentions of France. So in point 28, it says, just to recap, some individual Moroccans who were friendly to the authorities received, somebody got to put themselves on mute, received some leftover advantages. The French created local chieftains and administrators and the heads of religious fraternities, whom Mr. Zinedine described as the newly created feudals. So France took the time to establish local authorities, local chieftains, or these religious fraternities, like the Moorish Temple of America, for example. It was established 1 year after the Treaty of Fez, right? 1912, and then the Moorish Temple of America, 1913. Right. So France created local chieftains and administrators, and the head of religious fraternities is using El Glio as an example. But this is indicating, and also where it says the newly created feudals. So this is also uh, a reference to how the old Moorish governments used to run the empire. Um, the newly created feudals. Okay, this feudal system. So just pay attention to what they're saying. They're talking about in this instance El Glio, right, the so-called leader of the Berbers, and they're talking about um the Ipstal party, or however you Ipstal, or however you say it, party, right? These Moroccan nationalists and all this types of stuff. But one thing that they won't mention are the Moors on this landmass who knew they were Moors and not Americans, and um, uh, influenced such thought or such concept. So just pay attention to what's being said when they talk about the religious fraternities. Just keep in mind the groups such as Moorish Science Temple of America, right, with their grand sheiks, right? They came 1 year after the Treaty of Fez. So just keep all of this in mind, and I yield with that.
Islam. They also seem like they're pointing out the sellout, this El Galawi. He became rich, and they set him up as the Berber, the leader of the Berbers. So what they've done for generations is designate a leader and then offer him riches to do the bidding of the colonists. And as you see, he got really rich, and that they set the inhabitants there, made them put them under a feudal system where they have to pay tribute to the landlord, basically, who's the foreigner. Yeah, I yield.
Would anyone like to pick up where I picked off right there, doctors?
I'll go ahead and read. That is at least until my children, make noise and tell me otherwise. So, but I'll take over for now. It says doctors of law in various Muslim communities had given authoritative opinions that he should be condemned to death. He was, however, a staunch friend of France, particularly of Marshal Juin, whose policy had created many minor figures of similar nature. In the years 1950 and 1951, there were recruited about 270 men who were made governors of districts or sub-districts and were called pashas or qaids. The only qualification required of those officials were subservience to the resident general, knowledge, experience, and loyalty were of no importance. The objections of the Sultan to those reforms had made him a prisoner in Corsica. 29. A mutual interest to exploit Morocco had developed between French residents, the newly created feudals, and the heads of fraternities, and safeguarded by a large police force and army, measures tantamount to martial law and the suppression of liberties and human rights. So real quick, just this peep what's being said. We're gonna read that over again. It says a mutual interest to exploit Morocco had been developed between the French residents and the newly created feudals and the heads of fraternities, like these religious fraternities, right? This selling the Moors out, a mutual interest to exploit the Moors, so it's not a good thing. And was safeguarded by the large police force and army, measures tantamount to martial law and the suppression of liberties and human rights. The French residents, however, were not satisfied and thought of instituting a regime similar to the Union of South Africa. They recognized, however, a fundamental difference in the situation. First, they were relatively few in number and were not Moroccans. Secondly, they thought in terms of a separate state with a French army of occupation. They sought full political power in Morocco for their own ends. Okay. So that's telling you right there that these religious fraternity leaders, such as the Grand Sheiks, that are still selling out the Moors, right? So let's just get it straight to the basics, because everybody should know that the Moorish Scientific America is a religious organization. That's what it is, right? Just like Noble Drew Ali said, it's a religious organization, not a state, incorporated into a de facto state government. So it's a corporation, it's a religious organization incorporated into a de facto or incorporated into another corporation pretending to be a state government. So that's not what you call a state government. That's not what requires a state government. You don't incorporate yourself into a corporation. It's pretending to be something. That's not how it goes. That's not what a state government is. That's not what it takes to be a state government. Um, so um, just calling out the mutual interest that these French residents and religious fraternities had between each other. It says first, they were relatively few in number and were not Moroccans. Secondly, they thought in terms of a separate state with the French army of occupation. They sought full political power in Morocco for their own ends. 30 says the French residents had organized and to some extent were armed. They had amassed huge sums of money and conducted a strong lobby in Paris. They enjoyed real power in Morocco because the French officials were among their number and residence was, for all practical purposes, the executor of their policies. They were not Moroccan citizens, neither did they pursue interests of France. They saw only their own privileges. In consequence, there had arisen a special system of government which was neither that of France as a state nor of the Moroccans as a people. The objective of the system was to maintain the privileges and interests of the residents, to increase their number, to destroy the existence of Morocco as a nation, its culture, and to gain the support of the few Moroccans. Its practical program had been carried out almost completely by the machinery of direct rule and military occupation. So real quick, the French residents in these religious fraternities, what is it saying here? It's just saying that the objective of this system was to maintain privileges and interests of the residents, increase their number, and destroy the existence of Morocco as a nation. So Morocco, Moorish Science Temple of America, right? What is the intentions of these religious leaders? That whether or not we talking about just strictly the Moorish Science Temple of America or not, what is the question? What is their intention? What is their aim?
Their intention,
Oh,
to me, what I gather from that, this is Daryl Bay speaking with Nevada. Their intention to me, what I gain from that is to keep us asleep and to aid those that are supposed to actually be giving us the education that we needed. You know, if that makes sense. I yield with that.
that's exactly it. Because we know this is, for one, this is a document come from the United Nations, right? This is not a history book, random points, a meme. Secondly, as it goes to say, its practical program had been carried out almost completely by the machinery of the direct rule of military occupation. So we talking about, this is the government doing it, the French government. This is not a YouTuber. This is not a, some author, trying to get his theory across, right, and get likes and all this type of stuff. This is under direct rule of military occupation. Okay, so when we talk about Moorish American, go ahead. Somebody had a point.
Right. No, my apologies. I just want to insert with that and say and piggyback off what you were saying, that basically they had a plan already. They already had a plan. They knew what they were going to do, basically, and they've been executing their plan the whole time. I yield with that.
Yeah, Islam. It seems like their plan is to, like it's been said, is to colonize Morocco and take over the enterprise of Morocco, trade and resources, and they're doing it with their army and these, for lack of a better word, they're aristocrats for government. I yield.
Yeah.
Point of interest. Not so much so colonized Morocco, because remember, it was it was confirmed and accepted by the Sultan.
Yeah.
Specifically, the Treaty of Versailles. The Sultan gave the French control over the empire. The problem is that the French government was trying to bury the Moroccan people, right? They made us obscure, right? They as the other document we went over, it says that they what they say, it says something about they put us in the closet, right, and shut the closet to the doors of the world and the Moors, right? That's why, especially the Moors over here in the West, were like an afterthought. So colonialism is actually a part of this whole thing, confirmed by the Sultan, but they weren't supposed to shut the doors on the Moors. That's the part. That's the problem. They they made us they made us an afterthought to planet Earth. So much so that when you say Morocco, you think in the kingdom and not the empire. When in all actuality, Morocco represents the empire and not the kingdom. I yield.
Exactly. And
It's
that some of the information you shared will be in future open forums, discussing, sharing historical or showing books, history books that speak on Morocco, um, and referencing with international law. So that's good points that you mentioned. Not only in relation to this document, but our future open forums. All right, so we'll continue. It says in their memorandum of December 17th, 1952, the French residents had proposed a deposition of the Sultan. He had been deposed. They had proposed the removal of the heir to the Sultan. He had been removed. They had proposed an increase in the powers of the resident general. Those powers had in effect been increased. They had proposed implementation of the French plan of reforms that had been put into effect after the deposition of the Sultan. Those reforms had no connection with the interests of France or of Morocco, but only of French residents. There was no question of the consent of the government. So, pretty much what the chairman just alluded to, right? About the agreements of the Sultan, and then shortly thereafter, what happened after the Sultan was removed? France started doing their thing. They started burying the Moors, barricading the Moors. Is in the second document they say barricading them from United Nations, I believe is what they said, or international law, because
That's
they
right.
knew that was the way.
That's right. And and remember, they were supposed to bring us back into the constitutional fold of government. That's why Noble Drew Ali was saying, I'm calling on all you true Americans to help me bring my people back into the constitutional fold of government, because that was your obligations anyway, according to the Treaty of Fez. And even the Act of Algeciras, but they never did that. You see, Noble was reading these treaties. I yield.
Yeah, and that's
Islam.
another good point. Real quick, and I'll yield the floor to whoever just said that. That's another great point as far as bringing Moors back into the constitutional fold, because for some reason Moors only think that when the word constitution is mentioned, they're talking about the colonizers' constitution, which constitutes the colonizers' government, America, right? But when we talk about what a people need to decolonize, what do they need? A constitution to start off with. So to bring you in a constitutional fold of government is not to uplift the colonizer's constitution. It's to uplift your own constitution as Moroccans, so you can decolonize from the colonizers in their constitution that constitutes their citizens and all of that. Because if you claim not to be a part of the colonizer's system, right, then you claim not to uplift their or not to cling to their constitution, that constitutional fold, which is for the colonizers, not the indigenous people. But I yield to whoever just had another point of interest to bring to the table.
True indeed. This is Odelinko Bay. I just needed help to like to situate my mind on this for a second, if you could, because I believe last time I talked to the brother, the Wazir of Texas, he was trying to explain that to me too, but I think I'm kind of catching on to what he's saying. So are you saying that this would be kind of like in the situation of what the people which would be kind of like fiduciaries has done, like to the Moors, like France being appointed, like kind of like in a fiduciary position, and this is what has happened in that relationship? Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Okay, I remember you was telling me that.
And the
Okay,
territory is the trust. The people is the trust. And the fiduciary duty or relationship is to provide these services for us. Are you
All right, I get that. I understand that because watching up to the videos of where I am now, I would be in the mind frame of thinking that they've been in the aiding of the Moors. You see what I'm saying? But now I'm seeing like further into that. So that's the reason why that's just giving me the clarity as to catch me up. Islam, my yield.
Islam. So we'll start with 30.
Real quick, bro. Yes, they had a fiduciary duty to uh, bring us back into the government, back into the Moxons, because it was supposed to be the Moors helping the Sultan through the Moxon govern the great enterprise and govern the empire. But if that was to happen, then guess who would have to take the back seat? France. And they didn't want to take the back seat. So what they do? They ignored that provision of the treaty and went on with their criminality for clarity. Islam.
Islam. So we'll start with 31. It says the Sultan had long tried to act as a moderating power between the developing system of government and the disconnect of his people. Moroccans had repeatedly presented proposals for real reform on which all Moroccan parties had agreed. Though the advocates of the plans might be in gold, the plans themselves remain the guiding light of the Moroccan people. The plans themselves. Under pressure from France and the French residents, the Sultan had the choice of subjugating his throne to the new system or being removed. He refused to choose and called upon the French in the series of a memoranda to negotiate a solution. Influenced by the residents, the French government turned a deaf ear. The Sultan proposed a democratic representative regime with adequate guarantees for the acquired interest of the residents, but France refused because its policies were in the grip of the residents. So you see where it says the Sultan proposed a democratic representative regime. So you see it democratic, right, is what the Sultan proposed. Right. So even during these times, what's being said, what's being said here in 1950 is that the Sultan of Morocco, in relation to democracy, right, is he was encouraging that. He proposed democratic regime, right, guaranteeing acquired interest of the residents, but France refused because its policies were in the grip of the residents. Okay, so it was the people of France, that was the power of the French policies, right? The rendering of it. But nonetheless, in this sentence, what I want to point out is that the Sultan proposed a democratic, not Republican, right? I know a lot of Moors got a lot of their perception on democracy is skewed because of misinformation. But even the Sultan then proposed what? A diplomatic regime with certain hopes.
Islam Akil, let me ask, if you don't mind, allow me to ask a question to the floor, see what the minds of the Moors is like nowadays. What is a democracy? Somebody want to answer that? or even Google it and look it up. What is a democracy?
Islam, a government by the people.
Yeah. Are you reading that, or are you saying it off the top of your head?
Off the top of my head. So
Okay.
like a system in which the people, the system of government is vested in the people.
That's right. Who utilize the voting process to elect their officials. So that's a democracy. They ain't got nothing to do with it's a demonic platform for the unum sanctum policies to operate. That's BS. That was a bunch of misinformation from these Moors. It's a governmental system, but by the people, utilizing the democratic the voting process to elect their officials. That's all that means. You got to start
Islam,
looking things up. I yield.
Islam. I always thought it was the other way around, and that's the reason why I thought that's the reason why we was putting the name of our state and putting republic behind it and stuff like that. That's the reason why I was doing that, because I thought it was backwards. I thought it was the republic that was what that was for.
Yeah, well, yeah, we all thought that, but the republic.
Yeah, me too.
But remember, the republic is the people. The democracy is the structure that the people use to vote their government officials into office. So, like, for example, the Constitution for the Empire is a democratic, republican, secular structure. So it's democratic because we're using votes. It's republic because the people are voting for it. And the secular means that is the separation of church and state. That's what that means. So yeah, this is the clarity that we need in terms of statehood and understanding government, because we've been miseducated. I yield.
Islam.
So, and great points mentioned, Chairman. Appreciate that. So it goes to say, the Sultan, however, continued his attempts at negotiations. Then an abortive revolt was staged at Fez in 1951. Efforts were made to force the College of Ulumas or Ulmas to depose the Sultan, but the entire college upheld him. There followed another so-called revolt staged mainly by officials and civil servants with the support of paramilitary forces attached to French troops. There was in fact no popular revolt. It was staged by the resident general in order that he might act as arbitrator between the Sultan and El Glio, and to furnish an excuse to remove the Sultan. The responsibility of France was admitted by Edgar Faure, the Minister of Finance, and by Francis Mitterrand, another cabinet minister who had resigned in protest. Number 32. Whatever authority France had in Morocco was derived from international treaties, i.e. the Treaty of Fez. They contained nothing which authorized political changes, only social, economic, and cultural reforms specifically, mentioned in the treaties could be introduced, even they could be implemented only by the Sultan. The Sultan had sacrificed his throne to oppose the so-called reforms. He continued, however, to be the legitimate sovereign of all Morocco and was still recognized as such in the Spanish zone. 33. The reforms have been described by the representative of Pakistan, 629th meeting, but in that connection, certain facts should be noted. Under the new regime, the votes of the councils were assured by the fact that the French residents had 50% of the seats, while the remainder were mainly of their followers. The councils were consultative in nature and were controlled as to the subject of their discussions. Legislative and executive powers have been vested in special authority composed in the council retirement, or excuse me, restraint, and the council of viziers and directors, which were appointed by and were subservient to the resident general. Under such a regime, neither the Moroccan throne and the people on the one hand, nor France on the other hand, exercised any authority. The authority was in the hands of the French residents, i.e. these policies. These obligations of the treaties and even the United Nations Charter have been of no avail. Some 34. Some members of the United Nations held that such members were to be condoned, or at any rate felt that no action should be taken. The real reason for such views was not because there was a question of domestic jurisdiction, but because the members wanted to support colonialism. We're talking about the members of the United Nations that want to support colonialism. Another excuse given for inaction was that the Moroccan crisis had ended with the removal of the Sultan. In the past, too, it had been maintained that the Moroccan crisis had been brought to an end by various measures and treaties. But the crisis had never ended because it was not merely a crisis. It was a struggle of a people for the freedom of liberty. So when they talk about the independence of Morocco and Kingdom of Morocco and all this types of stuff, they talking about this has never ended, even though this is 1953, right? This is a few years before the Kingdom of Morocco was even established as an independent state. But nonetheless, they were fully aware that the United States being in Morocco, and nonetheless, these people were fighting for freedom and liberty, right? So you can say the Kingdom of Morocco went out and created their own state, but you still have people on this landmass who were under the jurisdiction of the United States who were fighting for freedom and liberty, right? Their struggle never ended. So when we see videos in the international arena talking about the decolonization of Morocco, you know, sometimes they're trying to hide information. Most times they're just unaware. But depending on who's speaking and whatnot. But this is what's being said here. It is the holistic view. Again, you got in 1952, that all of the international arena was well aware of the United States being in Morocco. So the people that's being said or considered to be a part of the United States are fighting for what? Freedom and liberty. In only 1 year, so they're speaking in code. You notice they don't want to mention United States of America in these documents like that, because they don't want people putting two and two together. But all in the case, it's United States of America and France. Well, why is the United States of America mentioned in these documents then? See? So it goes to say, under the charter, member states have an obligation to assist peoples in their development towards self-government. They know this, right? To bring about such a development in Morocco, there must be an end of oppression, acted by the series, lifting of martial law, and the establishment of representative institutions in which the people might freely express their opinion. Negotiations with France were also necessary. Okay, so what it say? Members wanted to support colonialism, members of the United Nations, some members. Some members were fighting decolonization, later on only to become a part of the United Nations. So I would say that their intentions will be more so pure, opposed to the colonial powers that were a part of the United Nations before them. Right, we're talking about 1953 right now. in which it says members wanted to support colonialism. So one could ask, why are y'all going to the United Nations then? Right? Okay, so if that's the question, and a lot of people feel that, they'll have you stumped by asking a question like that. But all you would have to do is point to the other 80 countries that already decolonized, because that's a question that they obviously got passed. Right? So the answers are all there. There is no fear mongering going on. The answers are all there. Right? So 35, it says, France had not respected the treaties. So obviously they breached these treaties. It can no longer invoke them. But even those treaties did not limit the action proposed in the draft resolution presented by Syria jointly with 12 other nations, which is A/C1/L60. And that's an interesting draft resolution to research. It says, Syria jointly with the 12 other nations, the text of which Mr. Zainuddin read to the committee. The sponsors invited examination of the draft resolution and were prepared to explain their views on specific provisions. The case of Morocco affected directly those 13 nations. The danger in the present situation was the feeling of inaction and lethargy, which was insinuated into the assembly by certain great powers. Okay, we talking about security councils, right? France, we talking about United States of America, right? It goes to say the draft resolution, however, was in the hands of the committee. On its decision depended the authority. On its decision depended the authority of the United Nations and the orderly development towards international cooperation based on the right of self-determination of the people and on international justice. 36 says, Mr. Munro of New Zealand recalled that the leader of his delegation in the General Debate 436 plenary meeting had made clear the New Zealand approach to the question of competence, and had stated that it was difficult to determine where domestic jurisdiction ended and the assembly's competence began. So, for instance, well, let me just finish this out. It says the question was one both of law and of fact. Not all speakers seem to have paid sufficient regard to the facts in the present case. By its support of the General Assembly Resolution on Morocco 612, Chapter 7, New Zealand had agreed that the Assembly had a measure of competence. So their opinion actually held weight, right? It was valued. Uh-huh.
Oh, I'm sorry. No, but I wanted to just go back when you was talking about like the other states. But when you start reading this, you're gonna start realizing this. A lot of these states that's not on the Security Council, they had to get their own independence. So it's like, just say DIMPT is trying to get its independence, but you say you got Cairo or one of the member states already, they got their independence. So it's like you'll start seeing through these documents. It's like, well, man, I remember what we went through to get our independence. How can we tell DIMPT no? But you got the Security Council, they're vetoing. But I just want to add that in. I yield.
Uh, um, okay, so it goes to say Morocco could not be regarded as a dependent territory in the usual sense, despite the secession of certain attributes of sovereignty under the Treaty of Fez. At the seventh session, the New Zealand view had been that the facts justified discussion and the adoption of a resolution calling upon the parties to continue negotiations. The resolution represented a constructive and permissible approach. Facts justifying the approach still existed. Moroccan nationalist aspirations on one hand, French interests and responsibilities on the other.
Point of interest.
Mhm.
Point of interest. Don't change. Don't scroll too far, brother. Right there where he says, see, look at what he said right there. It says Morocco could not be regarded as a dependent territory. Period. Because Morocco, according to the other document, has been in existence as an independent, sovereign, and independent state for over 1,000 years. So we've always been independent. We are the sovereign authority of planet Earth. I'm sorry, I don't know what to tell y'all, but it is what it is. And who is the great mother? The empire, who has been independent. And so when you look at the Treaty of Madrid, Article 7, where it says that all the states belong to the Sultan, that's also in the Treaty of Fez. That's the reason why. Because the empire has always been the sovereign, independent, external state. And all the other states, all other countries come under the authority of the empire. I don't care if it's France, I don't care if it's Germany, United States, Great Britain. All those colonial states belong to the Sultan, which means then that it belongs to the empire. And that's the reason why they don't want the Moors to come back, by the way, and enforce the Act of Algeciras. We're literally going from the bottom to the top overnight with this stroke of a pen. How did we lose the empire? With a pen. How do we get it back? With the pen. That's what Jay Bates taught us in class session 1. But who else said that though? Somebody said, how do we lose the empire? Through science. How do we get it back? Through science. What type of science? Biology? Probably not. Chemistry? Probably not. I think Noah Ali was trying to guide us towards jurisprudence, i.e., international law. I yield.
All right, so we'll continue with point 37. Says the question was that the assembly could usefully do, or excuse me, the question was what the assembly could usefully do. At the previous session, a moderate and helpful resolution had been adopted, which expressed confidence that France would endeavor the future or further and fundamental liberties of the people of Morocco, expressed the hope for continued negotiations and appeal for restraint. The resolution did not go beyond those matters deliberately. It made no attempt to set a time limit for the granting of independence. The evolution in democratic institutions was a slow and difficult process. The analogy drawn by the representative of Pakistan was not very satisfactory, for there was no great similarity between the Indian and Moroccan situations. But it should be recalled that even after many years, the final settlement between the various groups in India, so it's talking about the people in India, right? It's talking about Indians, was not reached without difficulty, suffering, and danger, nor it had been agreed that the Moroccan case was simple. It differed geographically as well as racially in forms of government. Before the entry of the French into Morocco, the latter had been more than a group of anarcho-feudal territories constantly at war. Its present unity was the result of French efforts. New Zealand was confident that France would continue to strengthen development towards democracy in Morocco. Point 38, the resolution adopted at the 7th session, 612, chapter 7, refrained from intervening between France and Morocco. The New Zealand delegation continued to feel that such interference would be outside the Assembly's competence. Oh, and real quick, so the other point, as far as the interference, right, and domestic jurisdiction, in Article 2, Section 7 of the Charter of the United Nations, that section in the charter has been used by colonial powers to prevent the United Nations from coming in their territory and further executing charter obligations. So this became a conflicting conflicting article as it relates to realistic mechanisms as far as decolonization goes. It became a conflict of interest. So what have the Moors done? More states, not being reinvented the wheel, but furthermore, uplift and fall of humanity. What do I mean by that? Well, in Article 2, Section 7 of the Convention of the Wazir Regional Council in the Empire of Morocco, or what's commonly known as the WRCC, what I call it for short, it basically allows the Moorish states, it doesn't hinder anybody or any international law from doing what it has been called to do. So unlike the Article 2, Section 7 in the Charter of the United Nations, which colonial powers use to say, hey, United Nations, you cannot come in our territory, telling us what to do as far as this domestic jurisdiction level, on the level of domestic jurisdiction, right? Because they have their own ways of how they're going to enact it in their own state. For instance, uh, any any document that the Moorish Americans have been waiting on is sitting on the desk of the president of the United States. And that's because those documents, which are now, though the United States said, hey, we're going to follow the Charter of the United Nations, hey, we're going to follow this treaty that we acceded to in this treaty. But on a domestic level, they have not fully enacted it. So it's not full, it's not in full effect, in a full force and effect, excuse me. So therefore, it's not enforceable in that state. So when they talk about this domestic jurisdiction, right, they're talking about interference in the assembly's competence, right, in domestic jurisdiction. How can this be resolved? Well, the Moorish states already resolved it in our own convention, right, by slightly tweaking the verbiage that would uplift fallen humanity to such a higher degree than what it already has. Okay, so I just wanted to share that, just give more clarification when it talks about the domestic jurisdiction, right? The things that they killed John F. Kennedy for, right? These documents that didn't want to be signed. But it goes to say, let's continue. It was disappointing that the hope for continuing negotiations had not been fulfilled, and that events had led to the deposition of the Sultan, whose sovereignty and personal security was guaranteed by the Treaty of Fez. The nature of the complaint had therefore altered somewhat. If those events had not taken place, and if there had been normal negotiations, the New Zealand delegation would have considered any discussion of inadvisable. However, there was the question of what useful measure could be taken. The Assembly's attempts to prove helpful had not been successful. That did not justify direct interference. That did not justify direct interference. It was a matter for argument whether any new resolution would be useful. If further proposals were submitted, the matter could be reconsidered, but the 13th power draft resolution just presented was clearly unacceptable. Its sponsors noted that the previous resolution had not so far been implemented, which was an appropriate expression in connection with the text of the resolution, of that resolution. It then proceeded to take more radical recommendations. It used the term true representatives, but the Assembly had no sure means of deciding who they might be. And to use such term would lead to endless controversy. True representatives. So basically you had the French instilling a French government when they were supposed to be instilling in directing the Moors to instill a Moorish government in the Moorish consular courts and whatnot.
Yeah, they like the other document was saying that. Yeah, they were using Frenchmen as in place of actual Moors. So there you go. It's reconfirming that again. And the ICJ said it too. How you?
Mm-hmm. Here it is. The draft resolution will also set a time limit for granting complete independence. The Assembly itself had recognized the difficulties in the connection at the 7th session when it had rejected terminology used by the sponsors of the draft resolution relative to bringing about self-government in Morocco. There was no change in the situation which would justify the Assembly not only in recommending independence, but also in specifying a time limit. So we're talking about a speedy trial. All right, we get more towards that. 39, it says, it cannot be agreed that if the Assembly's adopted no new resolution, it would be a retrograde step or a moral defeat. The New Zealand delegation did not believe that the Assembly could do more than reaffirm its hopes. But even if they were not embodied in a resolution, the existing resolution would lose none of its moral force. 40. The absence of the French representative was regrettable for it deprived the committee of knowledge of essential facts. The previous debates, Mr. Monroe had expressed the hope of the committee would act in such a way as to increase the confidence of France in its moderation and sense of responsibility. He had expressed the belief that no political principle could be pressed without regard for its timelessness, the legitimate interests of great power, or without regards for the interests of peace and stability. Without believing that the existence of the threat of peace had been established, New Zealand recognized the importance of protecting the area of Morocco from aggression, which meant that both before and after the establishment of self-government, there should be a government strong enough not to be a lure to an aggressor or to be the victim of internal dissension. So now they're speaking in many different levels. Talking about France, talking about the United States of America, because both are fitting for that last sentence we just read. but neither are doing what they're supposed to be doing as far as treaty obligations. So it then goes to say we're coming down to the last part of this reading. There is another document that we probably won't get to it, but we'll see. It goes to say number 41. In the opinion of the New Zealand delegation, the assembly had already done what it could usefully do. To try to do more might well endanger what had already been accomplished. In examining any proposals put forward, the New Zealand delegations will be guided by Article 1, Paragraph 4 of the Charter, which stipulated that the United Nations will be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations. Okay, so it's the center for harmonizing the actions of nations. So that goes, that's for the people who say, you know, things like we got to go to the United States when, just to put this out there for the umpteenth time. For anybody thinking that the Department of State, the Department of Justice, any department in the United States has anything to do with the process of decolonization as it relates to recognition, especially, does not know what they're talking about. We do not need the United States to recognize us again. It will make no sense for the United States in any way with one department, any department, in any way, to recognize Moorish states when it has already done so.
Well, great point. Point of interest. Oh, go ahead, finish your point though. I'm sorry.
You.
So we know that Resolution 1541 talks about three statuses: sovereign and independent state, emergence of a sovereign and independent state, free association, integration. We've already dealt with integration. The idea to have the United States help us through decolonization is automatically putting us in the status of free association, which is like the Indian reservation, which means they still have jurisdiction, but you could just, it's fine. You don't have to pay taxes since you want to be non-taxed. Okay, you don't have to pay taxes. But our civil and criminal courts still have jurisdiction over your bodies. And so at the WRC, according to the treaties, following the provisions of the treaty, we're going after independence, right? Emergence of a sovereign and independent state. More specifically for us, is more like re-emergence because we're coming back with the empire. I yield.
All right, so we'll continue with point 42. It says Mr. Zainuddin of Syria said that his delegation regretted no less than the delegation of New Zealand the absence of the French representative. He had, however, produced facts from the official French resources to substantiate his contentions. It was from a French source that he would give an answer to the statement made by the representative of New Zealand concerning the condition of affairs in Morocco before the French occupation. Mr. Zainuddin then proceeded to quote from an official report of Marshal Layudi, the first resident general, in which he had compared the anarchy elsewhere in North Africa with the order, stability, and civilization of Morocco. 1 second. All right. If somebody can take over the reading while I get my daughter right, I'd appreciate that. So if somebody wants to start off reading with point 43.
I'll read.
Oh, go ahead, sis.
43. With regard to to the suggestion that it was too soon to consider the new French reforms, Mr. Azzedine argued that those reforms, which would introduce a new system of government under which France would give up its authority to the French residents, but not to the Moroccans, should not be allowed to crystallize and so become more difficult to change. It was proper to consider them since they were the culmination of a long process and were not reforms authorized under the treaty. 44. Regarding the true representatives of the Moroccan people, there were two possible solutions. Elections could be held to establish a democratic regime, or those leaders who had made themselves known and were clearly supported by the people could be found as readily in Morocco as they had been in Syria, India, Indonesia, and elsewhere. It would perhaps be best to organize a referendum. 45.
Point of interest on McCartney real quick.
Mhm.
How you doing, Sayaraha?
I'm fine, thank you, brother.
All right, look what it says there in 44. Regarding the true representatives of the Moroccan people, there were two possible solutions. Elections could be held to establish a democratic regime. This is, I don't know what year it was? 1957, I think. We finally, in 2000, between 2001, 2021, and 2024, what we did was establish a democratic regime, several democratic regimes to bring back the empire, right? AMPAC, New Mecca, AMPAC, so on and so forth, Meru, DIMPT. These are democratic regimes or governments, Moxons. So this was our only hope. This is the reason why Noble Drew Ali said, I'm calling on the true Americans to help me get my people back into the constitutional code of government. We fell out of government. It was always the mission for us to get back into government. And that's what the Active Body Service is all about. That's why we preach the Active Body Service so much. Not only does it bring us back into government, but it's a decolonization document that comes along with tax dollars, taxes, and new revenues. That's why Noble said, children, you're playing rich. I yield.
45.
Real quick point of interest.
Okay.
Real quick. So right here, where it spoke about, where is it? Those leaders,
Who made themselves known?
yeah, maybe it was, regarding here it is, the true representatives, right? The true representatives. Now, remember, it had this in quotation earlier. It said it would cause a lot of controversy, right? What true representatives of the Moroccan people, right? So the controversy would come in where, such as like the Moorish-subjects of America, right? Hey, we need we're Moroccans, but we need to be an American government. That's two different governments, right? Two different representatives, two different governments. In which the controversy, this is them not want to be as direct, because the true representatives, I mean, if you're a part of the French government, then you're a representative of the French government, right? As an official. You're part of the American government, as an official, you're a representative of the American government. So what's the controversy about? What's the confusion about? What's the true representative? We know that France is out of place, right? They knew that, but then they also went on to say that these fraternities, these religious fraternities, organizations, teamed up with France. So if France already been called out, we know where France stand, right? We know their intent. We know exactly where they stand at. But it's these religious fraternities who do nothing but cause confusion to the controversy there shouldn't be a controversy. It should be no confusion there, right? Why is it confusion on who is a true representative? Now you talking about the French officials pretending to be Moroccans in these consular courts, or you're talking about these religious leaders or fraternities, right? I.e., these grand sheiks cause confusion. Talking about you can be Moroccan and American. And so I just wanted to call that out before we finish off with this document. You.
That was a great point, Noble.
All right, 45. The representative of New Zealand had said that there would be no moral defeat if the previous resolution was upheld. However, in view of the removal of the Sultan, that resolution was no longer adequate and had been rendered inoperative. New measures were required because the situation had deteriorated. With regard to defense against aggression, Mr. Zenedine observed that there was virtual martial law in Morocco for no apparent reason. If it was a question of protection against forces coming from a distance, why should such a large French army be tied down in Morocco, unable to participate in measures for collective security? 47. The chairman stated that the list of speakers was closed and that the following representatives were inscribed: India, Greece, Saudi Arabia, Iraq, Czechoslovakia, Union of South Africa, United States, Liberia, Afghanistan, Yemen, Burma, Indonesia, Yugoslavia, Bolivia, Syria, Argentina, Norway, Pakistan, Mexico, Union of Soviet Socialist Republics, Israel, Sweden, Guatemala, Peru, Dominican Republic, China, Lebanon, and Egypt.
That concluded the document. The first document, one of three. Obviously, this further expounds in the second document that will be continued. And correct me if I'm wrong, Chairman, but it'll be continued in this coming up Sunday's open forum, AMPAG's open forum.
Well, I think I was going to go over the document that you're going over now. There's a third one. If there's a third one, send it to me, and yeah, we'll touch on it.
Yeah, there's a third one. I'll send it to you. So it tells us the interest of these states we're dealing with, right? A lot of these questions that people have as far as, hey, why are you going to the United Nations, or can't the United Nations stop you, and all this type of stuff. All these questions are being answered in these documents we're reading, right? It gives us the jurisprudence, the reality of these treaties, right? Beforehand, afterhand, right? Because all we have is the treaties a lot of times. But this is a document come straight from the United Nations telling you the true intentions of France, right? 1 second. So we'll get off of this one. I'm not sure how far we'll get with this one, but this is the other document. That we wanted to present. So in these documents, Well, I'll get into that later. So we won't finish this document, but nonetheless we can start it. Okay. So I'll start reading this document. It gets straight to it covers a lot of the basics. Okay. This is the Office of the Historian. Papers relating to the foreign relations of the United States transmitted to Congress with the annual message to the President, December 6, 1880. Right, same year as the Treaty of Madrid.
Point of privilege. And I want to add, for everyone, like when you these documents that we're reading, like really try to interpret what they understand about what's taking place, what they understand about how it works. But this document right here, you're gonna get a good glimpse of what they understand about this protectorate, this status, and how they perceive it. But you'll learn a lot, just looking at it like that. But I yield.
All right, so it starts off saying, Mr. Matthews to Mr. Evarts, Tangier, April 16th, 1880. Sir, in compliance with the instruction conveyed to me in your dispatch number 162, dated the 13th ultimo, I have the honor to transmit to you herewith copies of my correspondence with our minister at Madrid, enclosing copies of the annexes accompanying my dispatch. Also, a copy of the address of the Italian ministry plenipotentiary at the last conference at Tangier, referred to in my dispatch to Mr. Fairchild. Mr. Fairchild to Mr. Matthews. In Madrid, April 7th of 1880. Sir, you have doubtless been informed by the Department of State that I have been authorized on behalf of the United States to take part in a friendly conference of foreign representatives, which it is proposed to hold at Madrid for the purpose of discussing the question of the protection extended to native Moors by the diplomatic and consular agents of foreign states residents in that country. I'm informed. Yeah.
Oh, my bad. I just wanted to look at the date. You see, it's April. I think the treaty was done, July? So this is 90 days that he's trying to get prepared with his information about what's taking place at the conference a year.
Yeah. So it goes to say, I'm informed by the department that you will give me all the information you can on the subject. I am now in possession of copies of all pertinent documents regarding the question, which were on tile in the Department of State up to March 12th, 1880, including copy of the department instruction to you and of your dispatches. From those papers, I gained much information, but I want to thank you to give me such information as you may deem valuable regarding the practice of protecting Moorish subjects by foreign representatives who are not in the employ of such representatives, and also as to the practice of protecting persons who've been originally Moorish subjects are now naturalized subjects of another power. Okay, so 1880, they're talking about Moorish subjects who are now naturalized of another power. So that answers your question as far as where Moorish naturalized and the time frame and etc. As he says, what is the advantage to such naturalized person? Is it claimed that he is not to pay taxes or obey the laws of Morocco in all respects? Once, can somebody take over the reading here? I got to tend to my daughter.
Yeah, I'll pick up right there. Are now naturalized subjects of another power. What is the advantage of such naturalized person? It is claimed that he is not to pay taxes or obey laws of Morocco in all respects, so long as such laws are honestly and impartially administered. It is held by the foreign representative that such person, once a Moorish subject, is entitled to return to Morocco and permanently reside there, entering into business. I'm gonna pause right there. Where did that language come from? That's a question for the floor. You hear me?
Madrid.
Islam, but y'all just seeing it in action. Okay, I'm gonna continue. Enter into business and, excuse me, and be exempt from the operations of Moorish laws. Is anything more claimed for such persons than the right of the representatives of the country of which they may now be naturalized citizens to see that they are not abused and harshly treated by Moorish officers, thus interfering for their protection? I shall be very glad to hear from you at length on these questions and on any other points you may deem worthy of my attention. I am sure you can give me very much valuable information because of your long experience and of the great attention you have given to the subject. I think I struggled. Okay. Mr. Matthews to Mr. Fairchilds, Consul of the United States of America, Tangier, April 11, 1880. Sir, I have the honor to acknowledge recipient of your dispatch of the 7th instance relative to your being authorized by the Department of State to take part in the international conference designed to take place at Madrid at an earlier date, and requesting me to furnish you with an additional information besides that already in your possession that may be pertinent to the subject and also answers to your various questions in the matter. I beg to state that I have also received instructions from the Department of State to the same effect, and I shall endeavor to comply with these demands by first giving you a brief review of the state of Morocco and the objects of protection. Also, copies of the opinions of several of the foreign representatives in Tangier. As you are aware, this country is shut in by the Mediterranean, Algiers, the desert of Sahara, and the Atlantic Ocean, crossed by the great chain of the Atlas, bathed by many rivers, opening into immense plains with every variety of climate, endowed with inestimable riches in all the three kingdoms of nature, and destined by its commanding position to be the great commercial highroad between European and Central Africa. So soon as the rivals and jealousies between some of the foreign representatives in Morocco cease to exist, and the Sultan is unanimously advised, unanimously advised and be to enter into the path of progress and civilization. This country is occupied by about 7 million of inhabitants, so calculated in the absence of any census. I want to point that out. Me and Kill reading that earlier. So like you can see, they guessing. They saying it's 7 million inhabitants, so calculated in the absence of a census. So they not even counting as such a thing, as well as statistics or the art of printing is ignored in Morocco, composed of Arabs, Berbers, Moors, Jews, Negroes, and Europeans sprinkled all over a more vast extent of country than that of the peninsula in Spain and Portugal. The Berbers who
Just to build on top of what you were just saying in relation to this small section. Um, you know, a lot of people when they go to research Moors, a quick Google search, it'll tell you Moors are from Spain, or Moors in Spain, and they taught Europe and all this stuff, right? But just as the Wazir alluded to, it says so calculated the absence of any census. So they just throwing numbers out there without accurate census, as well as statistics or the art of printing is ignored in Morocco. So certain statistics were ignored in Morocco, which were composed of Arabs, Berbers, Moors, Jews, Negroes, Europeans. So if they say sprinkle over a more vast extent of country than that of the peninsula of Spain, what are we saying? Well, it's bigger than Spain, right? It's bigger than the Kingdom of Morocco because, again, these are two areas that they only pay attention to when they mention Moors most of the time. So would they say this part went ignored? No, that's the only part that they calculate a lot of times. So what part is being ignored with the quote unquote Negroes in it? Right there. Say, oh, there's Arabs and Berbers and Moroccans in the Kingdom of Morocco. They never say anything about Negroes, quote unquote. So when you mention all of what's it saying just in this one sentence, you got to encompass quote unquote Negroes. You got to encompass the vast extent of the country, Morocco, besides Spain and Portugal, and obviously the Kingdom of Morocco, right? And also the fact that they're not even keeping track of the numbers, how they're supposed to. And what the true intent, because they could be very straightforward with you, but they're not. So with that, I yield.
Islam. The Berbers, who form the basis of the indigenous population, are a savage, turbulent, and indomitable race living on an inaccessible mountain of the Atlas in complete independence of the Sultan's authority. The Arabs, the conquering race, occupying the plains, a nomadic and
Nomadic.
nomadic and pastoral people, not entirely degenerated, notwithstanding their oppression from their ancient haughty character. The Moors corrupted, demoralized, and crossed by Arabs, and in many instances by Negro blood, are in part descended from the Moors of Spain and inhabited the cities, held in their hands the wealth, trade, and portion of the commerce of the country. And I want to point this out. Like you see how it says the Berbers, who form the basis of the indigenous populations, are a savage, turbulent, and indomitable race living on an inaccessible mountain of the Atlas in complete independence of the Sultan, right? So like the Sultan, and this would make what we doing so significant. Like the Sultan, and that's why as you keep learning, it's good to distinguish, like, us set of Moors, or you had an Arab set of Moors, because the Sultan, kind of like, for what I gather a little bit, is it's an Arab thing. You know what I mean? So them logically, they never expect a Berber, as they just pointed out, that was out of the Sultan's authority to ever become the Sultan. But we finna have it in 2024. So that's kind of like why it's stating that they're out the authority. But I had kind of learned that, so that's gonna be real neat. That's gonna shock them. But I'm gonna continue.
Point of interest, real quick, brother.
Yeah.
This is a really interesting read, and I missed a good bit of it because Nova called me. I told her to jump on the call, but this here, that particular paragraph that I came in on is quite revealing. The country is occupied by about 7 million of inhabitants, so calculated in the absence of any census as such a thing, as well as statistics or the art of printing, is ignored in Morocco, right? In Morocco, because see, they know they're in Morocco. Everyone knows that they're in Morocco. Composed of Arabs, Berbers, Moors, Jews, Negroes, and Europeans, sprinkled over a more vast extent of country than that of the peninsula of Spain and Portugal. And aside from perhaps the Arabs, but even then, anciently speaking, all those people are Moors. Berbers are the Moors, Jews are the Moors, Negroes are the Moors, Europeans are the Moors, and Arabs are the Moors, the original Arabs. We're not talking about everyone comes after us. And then they take our they take our likeness and our culture and so this is all of us. What it's saying is that we're a melting pot of different types of Moors. And when you talk about the European Moors, that's the British Moors, the brutish, right, Moors who helped to establish the United States. And that's why the United States isn't ours, because we're not British, we're Moroccan. And so this is what me and C came about, but he wasn't trying to hear it. Anyway, I yield. Great read as well.
Islam. Hey, Chairman, would it be safe to say the Berbers, right? That would be the tribal aspect, right? And the Moor, that would be the national, and the Negro, that would be like a black. But it's the same.
You can say that, yeah. And the Jews, that's based in culture, right? Religion. So their national protections and identity will come from the Moroccan nationality as well. So yeah, you can say Cherokee, you can say Cherokee, Choctaw, whatever, right? Any of these so-called Indian tribes.
These are ways they separate us, right? And divide us. Those are all names for us, but you know, in our ignorance, think those are different people, and it's all the same people.
Well, I missed what you said. I got called.
Berbers, the Moors, the Jews, the Negroes, Europeans, those are all different names or how they have divided us and categorized us, you know, by calling us those different things all over the world when we're all the same people, we're all the Moors.
Well, I wouldn't. I hear your plight on that, but I think it's more correct. The more proper perspective or concept about this is, it's like saying all bites. Those are our. We have different identities. The real European is not so-called white man or albino, right? It's the Moors.
That's what I'm saying. Exactly.
No, I know, but you're saying that they're naming us that to divide us, and that's what I'm trying to draw a difference here. I don't think that they're naming us that to divide us. We just happen to have all these different identities, and they're using it. They're weaponizing it against us. See, the fact that we have a lack of understanding and a lack of knowledge of self, we're not able to identify who's who and what's what as it relates to our culture and our bloodline. Right. So, but then also you could consider too this as well. From the 1700s, 1800s, especially the 1880 Treaty, Madrid, we were all naturalized in these several jurisdictions as well. But again, the original Roman Empire were Moors.
That's again. That's
you know, King George III got an afro. Queen Charlotte of Mecklenburg, you got Charlotte, North Carolina, Mecklenburg County. That's a sister. That's a Moor.
Yeah.
And so I think to your point, sister, it what boils down to is what Jay would always say before. Portuguese Moor, like William Dungy. it's all Moroccan. But then the question is, if you're French Moor, that's like saying you're an American Moor, you being naturalized. Someone had a point of interest. How you?
Islam. I put in the word Berber into Google, and what came up is a lot of pale skin faces. And what they're doing is whitewashing, because what we would think that if Berbers are people who are melanated in different shades, but these people look like the Europeans. And they do the same thing for Moors. If you look around in the internet, they show you pale-faced Moors, Egyptians on the pyramids. When my brother and sister went over there, they were chipping off the reliefs, the so-called not architect, but archaeologists, and taking down the dark complexions of, or painting over the dark complexions and putting up light complexions. Again, changing your perception of what Egyptians look like, because the original Egyptians were heavily melanated people. That, I mean, they were considered burnt face. The word Egyptian by the Greeks means burnt face. So what they're doing is changing what the melanated people who are original inhabitants of the land, making people think that they're Europeans or white or pale, just like they did with Jesus. And then what did Putin do? He revealed the pictures of what the true Jesus looked like and the people that time. But what I'm saying is they're controlling the narrative with these images, and they can, yeah. So I yield.
Point of privilege. Point of privilege. Yeah, that's exactly what they do when they go to dig and find these architects. They when they go, that's my son. When they go to dig and they find these places, they start right there at that point and start painting over the faces and stuff right at that point when they first find them. That's exactly what they do.
Right. That's the same thing they try to do with the heads in Mexico, but they couldn't chip away at them big lips and that broad nose, but they said they had some kind of disease or something, or they were the slaves, if you know what I'm talking about. The big heads in Mexico and South America.
Right.
The Olmec heads. They tried to explain it that way, but it was impossible, because anybody with common sense can tell who those people are. But again, they're trying to control their narrative by wiping us out of history. But anyway, that's what I wanted to bring up, because we were talking about how the Berbers, the Negroes, and so on and so forth, the Moors are being divided. And I see it as taking them out, changing their identity.
That's what the first document was saying. Basically close the what is it? Shut us into the closets of the world or something like that. Whatever. Basically concealing us, right? Colored. We are colored, i.e., concealed. We've been concealed,
right?
And such, we have become an afterthought. And don't forget about the Reconstruction era, because they don't just control the narrative based on paintings and pictures. They control it they control the written text as well. Yes. That's why we thought we were American, because Webster said that we were the copper-colored people.
Right.
Why to the copper-colored people, and this is where the educational reforms comes in. So we have to rewrite what's been. We have to undo what was done. Islam, are you?
Islam. The Moors corrupted, demoralized, and crossed by Arab and, in many instances, by Negro blood, are in part descendants from the Moors of Spain, and inhabiting the cities hold in their hands the wealth, trade, and portion of commerce of the country. The blacks, about 500, originally from Sudan, are generally slaves, servants, laborers, and soldiers. The Jews calculated in number to 200,000, descend from most parts from those who were exiled from Spain in 1492. Now I want to stop right there. Okay, what happened in 1492? So they got kicked out of somewhere, and where did they go? See, to let you know what they talking about. And from Portugal in 1496, and are, except those under foreign protection, persecuted, oppressed, hated, and degraded here more than any other part of the world. There are even compelled to walk barefooted in the Moorish section of the cities, and with a handkerchief tied over their heads and chin to prevent the Moorish boys from tossing their caps in the air. My last address to the Sultan on their behalf has done much in the way of preventing, at least for the present, unprovoked personal ill treatment. They exercise various arts and trades and display the ingenuity, plausibility, and tenacity of their race, finding in the possession of money earned from their oppressor a recompense for all their woes. The Europeans who Muslim intolerance has little by little driven from the interior of the empire towards the coast, number about 3,000 in all. Okay, I'm sorry. I'm confused. Number about 3,000 in all. Morocco, the greater part in heaven.
You sound muffled, good brother. You sound muffled.
Okay.
You sound good now.
Number about 3,000 in all Morocco, the greater part inhabiting Tangier and living under the complete jurisdiction of their respective ministers or councils, and exempt by treaty from all taxes, imposts, and military services. I want to pause right there. Like, what is that describing? What is that describing right there? Number 3,000 in all Morocco, the greater part inhabiting Tangier and living under the complete jurisdiction of their respective ministers. Right? Y'all got Minister of Foreign Affairs or Council Generals and exempt by treaty all taxes, imposts, and military services. The here to can somebody pronounce that for me?
Which word?
Heterogeneous. Heterogeneous.
The heterogeneous, disparate, Nicodemus, how you pronounce that one? Nomadic and irreconcilable population of Morocco is dreadfully oppressed and totally unprotected by a military government whose officers purchase their positions for the highest bid. This system, like a monstrous leech, sucks out all the vital juices from the state. The tribes, boroughs, or suburbs obey their sheiks, who purchase their office from the Basha, the cities and province, the Qadi, the Qada, and Paja, and the Paja who buys his official post from the Sultan, obeys the emperor, who is Sultan, Grand Sharif, High Priest, and Supreme Judge, executor of the laws emanating from himself alone, free to change at his caprice, money, taxes, weights, and measures, complete masters of the possessions and the lives and properties of his subjects, under the weight of his government and within the inflexible circle of the Muslim religion, unmoved by European influences, which unfortunately are consistently laboring under rivals and jealousies. and full of savage, fanaticism. Everything that in other countries moves and progresses here remains motionless or falls into ruins. This extraordinary state of affairs, which for centuries past has existed and at the same time prevented increase of population and civilization of Morocco, has been the cause of the practice of extending foreign protections to subjects of Morocco who had to deal in commercial transactions or otherwise with foreign merchants, consular officers, and ministers in order to protect from the grasp of Moorish functionaries the interests of the foreign merchants in their hands, as otherwise these officials would undoubtedly appropriate themselves the property placed for commercial purposes in the hands of Moorish subjects, either Mohammedans or Jews. It is pretended in the same of the Moorish governments that the protection extended by foreign representatives is a growing evil and a detriment to the Moorish treasury, which is thus deprived of the taxes which are properly due from the protected persons to the Moorish government. This pretensions under such an excuse is absurd, for it is well known that Morocco has no system of taxation, but only the arbitrary will of the Moorish officials who deprive their subjects of all they possess. The Jews are the only subjects of Morocco who have a regular prescribed tribute or annual tax. Oh, I'm sorry. My hand was on the thing. Just a second. Okay, the Jews are the only subjects of Morocco who have a regular prescribed tribute or annual tax imposed on them, which is called the Gazia. And indeed, it is paid principally by those Jews who are naturalized citizens or proteges of foreign nations in more proportion than non-protected Jews, as the former are better able to pay owing to their protected state than the latter unprotected.
Paul, point of interest. Who they talking about? What Jews you talking about? Huh. You ain't talking about the Rothschilds type Jews, are you?
The ones over there in Israel right now fighting the Palestinians, not those Jews.
The damn sure ain't talking about them. Right? Didn't Hitler say that the real Jews are in America? But notice how it also referred to us as Muslimin, which is Muslim. And then I believe it even refers to, when you say European, that's Christian. So we are the Muslims, the Jews, and the Christians. That's why we have a problem with an identity crisis, because we're everything. So what we got to figure out is what is the nationality, not the culture, because Jew is culture, Jew is religion, right? It's like saying Baptist, right? Muslim is religion, that's culture. Christian is religion, that's culture.
Mm-hmm.
What's the nationality? And that's another reason why we can't, we have to separate church and state. We can't promote in any way, even if we don't mean to, one religion over another. Like, for example, by way of a public inauguration, if we're promoting Islam, then our Christian brothers and sisters will probably be turned off. If we promote Christianity, then our Islamic brothers and sisters will probably be turned. You see what I'm saying? It's got to be a total separation of church and state, because with us, we are a little bit of everything. I am that I am. That represents the Moorish nation as a whole. I am that I am. I yield.
Islam. The laws of the country are obeyed by all, irrespective of nationality, religion, or protection. It is further stated on behalf of the Moorish government that the system of protecting Moorish subjects is of great prejudice to the rights and independence of Morocco. Morocco has a population of 7 million inhabitants. Of these, 500 are those under foreign protection and chiefly Israelites who invariably pay their tribute and are the most submissive and inoffensive people. Under these circumstances, the assertion that this insignificant number of quite peaceable people are of prejudice to the rights and independence of Morocco is well non-baseless. It is further.
We'll continue this document for a few minutes. Well, I guess make this the last paragraph since it'll change after these asterisks. So after this paragraph, we'll conclude and open up with question and answer.
It is further stated that there have been irregularities and even corruption in according protection, giving for granted that such has been the case in some instances. Though it cannot be proven, there is undoubtedly a remedy to put a stop to any or all such irregularities, and it is in the hands of the chiefs of missions and the Moorish minister of foreign affairs, to whom the list of protected persons is furnished, to investigate each case that comes within their notice and which cannot very well escape detection. Islam, he had texted me, told me at the end, but I knew about the end. But I thank everybody for coming, and I hope y'all enjoyed the read. Islam.
So we'll open up the floor for any questions or comments anybody may have in regards to this document or anything at all for that matter. So if anybody has any questions or comments, I'll yield to that before we close out here. No questions, no comments? All right. So I will say that in our future open forums, as I stated earlier, we'll be going over random books as it pertains to Moors, and correlate what these historical books are saying with international law, the missing piece that we're forgetting to cross-reference. So be on the lookout for those. Also, our links to these open forums will remain the same link. So if you have it now, it'll always be the same. But with that, I want to thank everybody for attending the open forum. If you're listening in, I want to thank you for listening. And everybody have a beautiful night. Islam.
Peace.
Islam.
Peace.